need to get going. If I could please have your attention. I'd like to welcome everybody. Thank you. I know there's a lot of good conversation. Looks like we really did need a bigger room for this seminar, but we'll make do with what we have. My name's Carl Rosen. I'm head of the Department of Soil, Water, and Climate, and also chair of the search committee. And today is the first of 3 candidates for interviewing for the head of Forest Resources. I'd like to introduce Kimberly Wallen. She's a research associate professor and associate dean of research and graduate programs at the University of Vermont. She received a bachelor's of science in forestry here at the University of Minnesota in 1994, a master's in forest entomology from the University of Wisconsin in Madison in 1996, and a PhD in forest entomology with a minor in genetics from the University of Wisconsin, Madison in 2002. After a PhD, she spent time at Northern Arizona University as a postdoc and at Oregon State University in the Department of Forest Science as a postdoc and research associate until 2007. And then she moved to Vermont in 2007 as a research assistant professor with a joint appointment with the University of Vermont and the USDA Forest Service. In 2013, she was promoted to research associate professor, and she was appointed as interim associate dean of the research and graduate programs in 2015, and then appointed as associate dean of research and graduate programs in 2016. So I'm sure she'll be able to fill in some of the details that I've missed out, but she has a long background there. At Vermont, Kimberly holds a research and teaching appointment where she conducts research on patterns and functions of forest in response to human-induced changes in climate, land use, and the introduction of non-native invasive terrestrial organisms. She currently teaches in-service learning courses that integrate research and teaching and engage local municipalities, extension, and the Nature Conservancy. So today we've asked Kimberly to give a seminar on her vision for the Department of Forest Resources. So let's welcome.
Is this on? Yeah? Okay. Then I don't need that. So thank you very much for the introduction. Thanks everyone for being here today. This is amazing. I know that the session's out, and I really thank you and appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here today. Thanks to the search committee and to the chair. I know it's a tremendous amount of work and dedication to the department, and I really thank you for your time. And I don't know if Lori is here, but thank you if she's here for making me feel welcome, for answering questions and emails and fielding calls at the airport. Panicked that I wasn't going to get here last night, but I'm here. So, so the vision, the title that was given, I thought to start with, I'd tell you a little bit about myself. I'd go into a little bit more detail about my educational research teaching background before I kind of share with you a vision in the last 10 or 15 minutes or so. So as I mentioned, or maybe not mentioned, I was born and raised in Minnesota. My family's still here. My parents are still here. My 2 sisters, brother, many nieces and nephews are still here in Minnesota. And growing up, grew up in rural Minnesota. I was an avid reader, and I always had a dream of exploring and, kind of getting out of the town in which I was raised. And I had big dreams. And so I'd share those with my grandmother, and at about age 10, 4th grade, she said, "Kimberly, if you want to do that, you need to get an education." And so at that early age, I started to plan, and I got good grades. And I was able to apply for and get into the college, to the university, the first person in my family to do so. And with a lot of first-generation students, you don't really know what the options are out there. So from what I knew from like my mother's soap operas and things like that was you're either going to be a doctor or you're a lawyer. And so I was pretty good in math and sciences, so I enrolled in pre-med and started out as a mathematics major. And living in that dorm that first year was pretty eye-opening. I met a lot of people, and I met someone down the hall who had this postcard. It wasn't this exact postcard, okay, but had a postcard of Bellingham, Washington, and we thought, you know, I wanted these adventures and stuff, so we planned a road trip to Bellingham, Washington, because I wanted to see the ocean. I'd never seen mountains, and we were going to do this together. Well, best laid plans. The car broke down. No, this is not my car. It would be a much older model. The car broke down in Bonners Ferry, Idaho. So it became an adventure to Bellingham, Washington. Became a road trip to Bonners Ferry, Idaho. Has anyone been in Bonners Ferry, Idaho? Okay. So this is in the early 90s. So I called home. And true to the way I was raised, my mom said, well, then it's best to get a job, fix that car. And for those of you, a couple of you that have been in Bonners Ferry, not a super booming economy at that time particularly. And so I thought, what am I going to do? And someone said, well, you know, the Forest Service is hiring seasonal temps. And I thought, well, I wonder what that is. So I applied, and I was hired to be on a tree planting crew and also to work prescribed burns. And I share this with you because this was a pivotal moment in my life and in my career. Because during that time, I met silviculturalists. I didn't even know what that word meant. I met forest entomologists, forest pathologists, soil scientists. I learned that when you plant a tree, the roots have to go straight down. Otherwise, they curl around. I met people that I had no idea that these positions and these careers existed. And so I returned to University of Minnesota and enrolled in this department. At the time was Department of Natural, or School of Natural Resources in Forestry. And during that 4 years is where I learned from several of you the traditional and the foundation of forestry that I carry with me and that I've carried with me forward into my career. And you recognize some of these people. Some of you are in the room. Some have retired. Some have passed on. But you guys are what opened the door to so many other dreams and pathways. And if you're feeling a little sheepish and thinking, boy, I used to look younger back then, don't worry, so did I. And so with several of your encouragement, I'm looking at Paul and some others that really encouraged me to pursue graduate work. So I applied for and I started my master's and PhD under the direction of Dr. Ken Raffa, clearly one of the best forest entomologists of our time. And you'll see a couple of these this map with these little dots. And the dots are just where I've either lived or I've had the opportunity to do field work. And so with my master's, I'm a pretty practical person. And with my master's, I wanted to ask or answer a question that was practical and usable for land managers. And one of the question was, at what level of defoliation, jack pine defoliation, should land managers go on and remove those trees to prevent spot outbreaks of Ips grandicollis at the time? And so that was, quantified defoliation and whatnot, and we were able to deliver that. But in the process, I was introduced to plant defense theories and this whole idea of like the theoretical framework around some of these questions. And it was during this time that I really kind of started the formation that there's a real continuum between theoretical work and reality, or in those applied questions. And my master's work was very tree-centric. I had just come from here, so it was just all about the tree. But as I spoke with my peers and with Ken, there's always a lot of talk about population behavior, that these insect populations behaved one way and then they shifted another way. And I know I drove Ken absolutely crazy because I kept saying, why and how? And like the bark beetles don't like phone each other and say, oh, we're in an outbreak, let's behave differently. Like it just didn't make sense. And Ken was generous enough to support me through my PhD work, where I was able to ask some of those questions. Are there relationships between the densities of the bark beetles and their individual behavior? And we answered some pretty cool questions with that. They were published in various journals. And it was through this experience, or these experiences, and being able to publish some key findings in some really good journals, that it opened the door to a postdoc at Northern Arizona University. And so I moved to Flagstaff, and I'm just going to get a sip of water. I moved to Flagstaff to work on a restoration project. So a lot of restoration at that time didn't have a lot of science behind it, and the goal of this restoration project was to have some science supporting some of the restoration efforts that they were doing in Ponderosa Pine Forest. And Ponderosa Pine Forests in Flagstaff are an arid ecosystem. They're high elevation desert forests. And it was the first time I was really introduced to a lot of stakeholders and also a lot of people that were not interested in restoration or necessarily the science behind it. So that really opened my eyes and introduced me for the first time to really the social aspects of what we do in the forest and how our research can have impacts on that. And I worked with a team of soil scientists, botanists. And it was also the first time that I mentored master students. I wasn't their advisor, but I played a mentor role, and I was on their committee, and that really energized me. And I was there for a couple of years, as Carl had stated. And from there, I moved to Oregon State. And it's a little convoluted how I got there. I shared during breakfast, and I just decided that I'm going to share right now. I basically met who is now my husband. He was a professor at Oregon State, and so I moved there. And that was one of the reasons of locating to Oregon State. But while I was there, I was fortunate enough to be invited on a team of scientists with the BC Ministry of Forests to look at the variability of tree mortality and what might cause that variability of tree mortality from the mountain pine beetle. At the time, the mountain pine beetle was it was an outbreak. The outbreak was building. It wasn't nearly as large as it is now, but from that we looked at the BC Ministry of Forests have these provenance trials planted throughout British Columbia to look at tree growth and to look at the genetics of it. And then they're abandoned after 10 years. So we were able to go in and actually utilize those. They were replicated blocks. It was a beautiful design. We were able to go in and look at the heritability of constitutive and basically the defenses of the tree. We have one paper published. We have another that we've been going back and forth, it feels like forever, in ecological monographs. And the reason it's gone back and forth quite a bit is that our results, and this is a huge study, really kind of shift the thinking that we've had for decades of what these interactions are like. So we've had some fun trying to address repeated reviews with that, but I'm confident that will get out and inform future research. So from there, as mentioned, I moved to University of Vermont. And so my position at University of Vermont, it was one of the first ones in the nation. It's a joint position, and it still is. 50% of my position, I work with the Forest Service. I report to the Forest Service. 50% of my position is with University of Vermont. And you might think, well, that's a little bit unusual. It is a little bit unusual. It was a little bit rocky, but with really good communication, really good openness, it's been a really strong partnership. And we now have 3 positions at University of Vermont, 3 of these shared positions. And I know that there are some within the department as well, and they've grown across the nation. But one of the things, if you'll notice, if you think about Western North America, it's really a conifer-dominated landscape. There are a lot of federal lands, a lot of, whether it's BC federal or ministry, or the Forest Service, a lot of federal lands. And so those were the main partners that I worked with. Well, at University of Vermont, and I don't know if any of you have been in New England, there are a couple of things that are notably different. There are a lot more people. There aren't huge landscapes of federal land in which you can go and work with just a couple of people and design very large experiments. So there's a lot of private landowners, which is awesome. But along with a lot more people, there are a lot more universities. And so like right up the road, there's Middlebury, right down the hill, there's Champlain College. You know, I can drive 3 hours and be in Boston area, Cambridge, Harvard, a couple hours to be at Yale. And so I really needed to shift my research kind of mentality, and not just the type of questions that I asked, but just the whole idea of collaboration. And I found that I really, really enjoy it. I really enjoy meeting people. I enjoy talking with them, hearing their research interests, finding where there are commonalities or where interests intersect. You know, things don't need to be forced. And through that, you know, I've maintained some of my collaborations. I brought them with me. But through the past 10 years at being at University of Vermont, I've really been able to build a strong network of collaborators where we ask some really difficult questions. We also ask questions that are very relevant to Vermont, which is a very tiny state, but New England as well. And you know, I put this up here just also to illustrate that if it worked out that I became the department head of forestry research, I'd be bringing these collaborators and these collaborations with me. And it would be really exciting to meet with folks and to see if there are any places where we can synergize or where your interests intersect with some of the colleagues that I've worked with in the East and in the Southeast and in the Pacific Northwest as well, to really build that research portfolio of the department. The other thing that the position at University of Vermont has allowed me to do is to mentor graduate students. And so this, I'm going to share this right here. I really like to, I've enjoyed mentoring graduate students, and I'll talk about in my new role as Associate Dean how that has played out with faculty. But with graduate students, I really like to strengthen others. I like to provide, this might sound kind of strange, but I like to provide a safe place for graduate students to share their ideas and also to fail. I think, you know, with research, you need to sometimes fail to be able to rethink your approach and to be successful ultimately. And you need a safe place and a supportive place to do that. And so I really worked hard to just instill that in my lab group. And I'll just really quickly go through who these people are, just to give you kind of an idea of where my research interests lie, as well as there. So Ariana, I co-advise her with an environmental sociologist. This came about in a hallway conversation of, I said something about perceptions are attitude, and Walt Kinzel said, well, what do you exactly mean by that, Kimberly? And I said, well, I don't actually know what I exactly mean by that. And so we started, because that's his area of research, and we started talking about that. We were able to receive funding to support Ariana. She's just finishing her comprehensive exams, and she's asking that question of the society's attitudes and perceptions of invasive species. And from that broad question, we are now asking, what is the cost of ambivalence to ecosystem services? So she's generated these questions. First year PhD student, Kirsten, who's asking some really cool questions about the phylogenetic diversity of resident species of invasive of plants. She's very interested in plants, as is Marina. Marina and I have had many heated discussions about many hypotheses that have come out of invasion ecology, and there are few that have actually been empirically tested, so she's has taken on a very ambitious PhD dissertation to test the invasion meltdown hypothesis using multiple ways of doing that. Lucia just uploaded her dissertation. We just submitted her last publication last week. And she looked at the population genetics of the vector of Chagas disease in her home country of Guatemala. And I'm happy to say that she just received a job as the epidemiologist for the state of Vermont. Kyle's finishing up August 8th, looking at biological control of hemlock woolly adelgid, an invasive insect on adelgids. He's passing the baton on to Alex, who's starting on Friday, taking over that project, so there'll be some overlap with him this summer. Tav Aronowitz just finished her master's as well. We just submitted her first publication, looking at the morphometrics of hemlock woolly adelgid and how that aligns with the genetic distinctions that Nathan Havel with USDA Forest Service identified. Sarah's work came about, she's a final, this is her last year in her PhD. The Chittenden County is where Burlington, that's County Burlington resides, came to me and said, there's this big windstorm and a lot of residents in Chittenden County are coming to him, asking him, there's all this wind throw, can we salvage it? What's going to happen with the regeneration of the forest if we salvage it? And so Keith, at the time, who's a Chittenden County forest, came to me and said, well, what do you know about this? And so I went to the literature. There's a lot known in the western United States, not as much known in the eastern United States. So we were able to receive funding for Sarah to actually answer that question. So she actually works with 22 landowners on their property to look at the different levels of salvage harvesting. And then we have another PhD student, he's advised by another faculty member, who's looking at the motivation for salvage logging. So this is kind of the early parts of what does this interdisciplinary work look like? What could it look like? And this is just a snippet of some of the papers that have been published, some of the publicity, news press that we've received. I gave my first interview on NPR, which was pretty nerve-wracking, but it was kind of fun to all of a sudden have my mom call and like, is that your voice? It's like, yes, it is. So that was kind of fun. And then also at University of Vermont, I do have a teaching role. And when I interviewed there, I described to them like how I wanted to teach. I had this like grand dream or idea of how I wanted to teach. And they said, oh, well, that's service learning. And I had, at the time, I had not heard of that. I'd been heavily in research positions. And they said, you should sign up, or not sign up, but apply to the Service Learning Faculty Fellow. And I did, and my application was accepted. And I went through a pretty rigorous training of what that means to teach a service learning class. And I love it, and that's something that, I bring that passion with me. I don't know how much service learning is done here in the department, but that is definitely something I really love to discuss, and discuss across departments as well. And so I'll put up a couple of examples here. My first semester, the dean at the time blasted out an email to the faculty saying, hey, is anyone interested in arid ecosystems? And I thought very naively, sure I am. I worked in Flagstaff, like I must know something about arid ecosystems. Well, he said, he talked to me a while and he said, okay, well, take this opportunity and go with it for 1 year, and the school will support you for 1 year. And develop a class in which you're teaching the content during spring term, but you're actually partnering with partners in Israel, in Burlington's sister city of Arad, and end that class with a 2-week field practicum. I thought, well, heck, I can do this. And in that first year, it was a struggle, but it was fun. It was a big challenge. And I identified partners in Burlington as well in Arad, Israel, where the students worked on parallel projects where water was the driver. So they worked with their service learning partners in both places. And then we went to Arad, Israel, and then these students are sophomores and juniors, and we loosely did a place-based comparative analysis of recycling, of art, of food production in the two places. And it really opened the eyes of the students that water is absolutely critical. And I think we all know that, but to see those light bulbs go off in those students was absolutely amazing. And I shared earlier today that after that first year, I thought, there's no way I'm doing this. 14 days, 24 hours a day with 10 sophomores and juniors. I was just exhausted. But I received handwritten letters from the students saying, you've changed my life. You've changed the way I think about the world. And so I continue to teach that and offer it for 6 years. And then I partnered, I teach a forest ecosystem health class, and the state of Vermont, the state forester and the state entomologist said, we can survey and we can give outreach materials to our public campgrounds, but we can't to our private. Would that be a reasonable partnership with your class? So we did that for a handful of years. And then we moved to surveying street trees for invasive insects and working with the actual cities to come up with street preparedness plans. So we were able to fill a gap that the state and the cities and the communities needed while giving the students some real practical hands-on experience. And I'm happy to say that several of the students went on to work for the agencies, and some have moved on in their career even further. And there's a really fun outreach component that the students do, and it's cool to see their confidence that they gain. And that would be something I'd be interested in, like I said, in exploring. And then also bringing undergraduate students, giving them research experiences. I had those experiences here, and so it's really fun to give back and give that to the students there. So 3 years into my time at University of Vermont, the next dean at the time, she came to me and said, what would you think about being the director of the graduate program? And I thought, well, sure, why not? Well, that was very eye-opening. That was the first time that I had been in any type of administrative role in which I had some sort of control over resources. And I learned very quickly. I didn't do anything. I just kind of maintained status quo for the first year. I really wanted to learn why things were done the way they were. I didn't know the history. I'd only been there 3 years. I really, like I said, just wanted to learn and to talk to people and talk to students and faculty that were recently retired, and ask them and really learn about the graduate program. And so I looked at things that would be pretty easy to change, that would have a high impact, some things that would be pretty hard to change, that would have a high impact, some that would have easy to change and have a low impact. And I addressed those kind of in that way. And these are just a couple of really quick examples. One of the first things I did was I developed and implemented transparent processes to allocate graduate teaching assistantships to the classes. Previously, they were done in the dean's office with the director of the graduate program. I thought, we can develop something that's transparent, that people can actually follow the logic of why certain classes are getting teaching assistantship support while others are not. And then also align graduate teaching assistantships to support the research of the faculty. We can be open about this and have a process that people know why it's happening. And if they want to challenge it, that's absolutely fine. But at least it's out there. And I did that second year, and it was received very well by the faculty and the students, and that process has remained. We've tweaked it a little bit to improve it. Also, graduate teaching assistantship stipends and research stipends weren't the same. That just felt wrong to me. So I worked with the dean, and she at the time used her dean discretionary funds to kind of use those as bridge funds so we could get those equal until grants and other budgetary things to kind of catch up to that. We developed a graduate student handbook, so there's one place to go for graduate students and faculty to see what the requirements were and the expectations. And then the students wanted more of a community, so I worked with them and I really just empowered them to develop a Rubenstein Graduate Student Association, and that was part of their professional development. There's a president, a vice president, a treasurer, et cetera. And this is the first one at University of Vermont. Also during that time, I was fortunate enough to be asked to be on a strategic plan. One of the board of advisors had said to the dean, we really should have a strategic action plan for the school. And so she invited me to be on this team. And so 2013, the summer of 2013, worked on a team to really identify and work out that strategic action plan. And we hired in a consulting firm to help us with that. And this is a really overly simplified schematic of kind of how I approached some of the challenges that were identified, or some of those gaps that were identified, and how we went about identifying those in this process. So if we're at point A, that's where we're at. And we have our mission, we have our vision, which is point B, and then how do we get there? And as someone in a leadership position, you want this to be direct. Of course, it's not as linear and clean as this, but you also want like specific goals with time constraints on them. So what we needed to do is identify, collect data. And oops, I'll back up here. We needed to collect data, so we surveyed internally as well as externally. What are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? And what we identified was one of our strengths is we have the expertise of our faculty is very, very diverse. We're a school. We don't have departments. It's very diverse. But we have really strong partnerships that add some of that depth. Some of the things that were identified as weaknesses is we did not have competitive funding packages for our graduate students. And the students didn't know each other. There felt like there was a lack of community. We were primarily focused on master's degree rather than PhD. And although we talked a lot about interdisciplinary teaching and research, the school, we weren't providing support for the faculty and students to actually execute that and do that. And so some of the opportunities were to strategically use some of our gift funds. I'm going to highlight what we did with our McIntyre Stennis funds. McIntyre Stennis at University of Vermont comes into the Rubenstein School. And how we could do that to support faculty collaborations. And the other thing in handling all the graduate student applications, I was noticing that we were losing really top students because of the lack of competitive stipends. We were losing them to Ivy League schools. There's nothing that we can do about that. And if you're a student, you get an offer from University of Vermont, or you get an offer from Cornell or Harvard. I think in a lot of cases the students are going to pick that Ivy League school, which they did. So what we did, so the next dean, we worked as a team, and we came up with this idea for McIntyre Stennis Fellowships. And he flew down to DC and spoke with Catalina, who's the lead of the NIFA McIntyre Stennis, and we promoted or suggested this idea of these interdisciplinary fellowships, and not interdisciplinary by stapler, but truly interdisciplinary projects. And Catalina said, sure, go for it, and we'll check in a couple of years and see how that's going. We wanted to increase the stipends. I did a lot of research looking at the stipend level that we were offering, plus the cost of living. Burlington is an extremely expensive place to live. And so we came up with what is a minimum stipend in which students could live. They're not living, in the laps of luxury, but they are living solidly enough that they can focus on their research and not have to get a part-time job. And so I worked with this dean to use gift funds and to use the dean's discretionary funds to bring those levels up for our current students without having to go to faculty. It wouldn't be fair to faculty to say, oh yeah, so you have this grant, now you had money allocated in these categories. No, it has to go up to increase the stipends. That just was not realistic. So he was able to use some discretionary funds to bring that up to those levels that we decided were competitive and livable until the grants could catch up. And we've successfully done that. And we were able to offer these competitive funding packages. And we also developed a cohort model with the students. And so I'm just going to talk about that here in a second. So the results, we now offer much more competitive packages, and we also pay the tuition for the students. We developed a cohort model in which all incoming students, master's students, attend a 3-day orientation retreat. It's off campus. And they work very closely together. They get to know each other, and then they go directly into, we only have 2 required classes. They take those 2 required classes together. So we have social scientists, natural scientists of all varieties in that classroom together, working with each other, and faculty many faculty participate in that class to bring in their interdisciplinary expertise. We require our PhD students to actually co-teach a class as part of their requirement, and up to that point, the experience of both the PhD student, the faculty member, and the students in the class were quite variable. So we decided to hire someone that would actually come in and teach our PhDs how to teach at the university level. And he's retired, but that was his scholarship and his background was what are the different learning levels, what are the neuroscience behind learning at the college level and at the freshman through final year. And then finally, what I've alluded to previously, we developed these McIntyre Stennis umbrellas, we call them. We have 3 of them right now. They are truly interdisciplinary. Right now, we have 16 faculty members involved, 15 PhD students, 3 postdocs, 3 master's students, 5 research faculty involved in these umbrella projects. And they've been tricky to manage. The interdisciplinary work, research, it's messy, it's challenging, but we're starting to see kind of the fruits of this as the first one is reaching its 4th year. And we're starting to really come together. And so then the final part of this is assessment. So then our next dean, who's the current dean, she's been with the school for 3 years. She's fantastic. And she brought with her a real toolkit of assessment. And she said, you know, these are all wonderful initiatives. Let's assess them. And so she hired someone to help facilitate some of that assessment. We had an external team come in. It was a lot of work, but I learned a lot about assessment. In that, this past October, it confirmed a lot of the things the changes we made were improvements. We addressed some of those gaps. It also identified some others, which is good, which is the intent of that. We had a site visit in April from the Northern Research Station. Tom Schmidt and Beth Larry and others came and spent a couple days with us to talk about how's this partnership going. Is it productive? Are both partners happy? Are the faculty members happy? So that was a really fun visit. And then we had Catalina Blanche from McIntyre Stennis come and visit for a couple of days. And he thought it was going to be really straightforward. Here are 3 projects. We're going to stand up, you know, three presentations. But little did he know, and I guess I didn't communicate it well, within each of these 3 umbrellas are 4 to 6 sub-projects. So what he thought he was going to be seeing 3, he was seeing 16 research projects. And he said after that he was just blown away at the level of the caliber of the research, the level of involvement. So he's quite pleased with this model. He was also quite pleased to hear that we average about 15 to 17 publications per year from these umbrella projects, which is pretty high. So I'm noticing I'm running out of time. I'm sorry. Also, with the appointment as interim associate dean, I still have the responsibilities of directing the graduate program, you know, administrating the work for graduate students, monthly graduate faculty meetings. So we have about 7 of those. I've been doing that for about 7 years. The budget, I've initiated a campus-wide policy. And some of these are some new responsibilities with the associate dean. I oversee research lab space and all the renovations that are going on, workload, reappointment, promotion, performance evaluations. We developed a professional master's that I'm happy to talk about a little bit more. I oversee the McIntyre Stennis budget. I facilitate a handful of committees that primarily deal with our lands, graduate standards, and again, develop some very transparent processes that were not in place prior to. So, I'm coming now back to Minnesota. So I wasn't looking for a job. I'm pretty happy with my job. It's challenging. I've built some really strong partnerships. And if any of you have been to Burlington, it's really pretty. And so when the person came to me, I can't remember, it was February, and said, "You have to apply for this. You'd be good at it, and it's, you know, I think you'd be a good fit with the department." And I said, well, you know, I kind of like where I'm at. I have friends and stuff. And, you know, I really stepped back and reflected, and I thought, what am I thinking? This is an opportunity, I don't know if it'll ever happen again, that I can actually come back with all my experience, my research, teaching, administrative experience, with some real examples of successes. I do have examples of failures. Of course, I'm not going to highlight those here. But I learned from them, and I'm not afraid of them. But I have all these experiences that are kind of triangulating with this position. And it is an opportunity to come back and give back to the place that opened up a lot of doors for me. And that literally gives me the goosebumps. And then not to shy away from my entire, my mom and dad are here, my sisters, my brother, nieces and nephews, my best friend and her family are still here. And so I thought, yeah, okay, I'm going to apply for it, and I'm going to go for it. And so I looked at the department. I thought, wow, this department is amazing. It's a leader in the field. The state of Minnesota already knew this, but it has a very unique biophysical position in which a lot of you ask some really cool ecological questions in the face of climate change, various disturbances, land use changes. Just talented faculty and students. I pulled some statistics from the 2014 strategic plan, and was just like blown away. It is one of the top graduate programs in the nation. Obviously, there's a very dedicated staff. There are some people that were here when I was a student that are still here, so that speaks to the dedication and the wonderful place this must be to work. Strong partnerships and state-of-the-art facilities. So when I thought about this, I thought, well, this is fantastic, but I bet Minnesota faces some of the same challenges that we do at Vermont, which is changing demographic of students, which is, you know, the financial constraints that we have, the discussions around the quality of education versus the cost of education. And so those are real things I grapple with on the leadership team at University of Vermont. I'm sure that there are things that are grappled here at University of Minnesota. I would bring with me that experience and some of those insights and thoughts, and I'd be very open to working with the other department heads and the deans to grapple with that as we move forward, and to ask always, are we as good as we can be? Are we as relevant as we need to be? And these are really critical questions, because no matter how the landscape changes, we need to be good and we need to be relevant. So the Department of Forest Resources has a strong tradition. We want to maintain that tradition, but we want to make sure that we're always relative. So the vision, and again, sorry about the time. So the first thing, of course, what I did is went to the vision statement of the department. What is the vision? There's a strategic plan in 2014 that had a vision, and when I read this as a national and international leader in advancing solution-driven science, Forest Resources delivers extraordinary education, breakthrough basic applied integrated research, and inspired outreach and community engagement in the science and practice of forest and natural resource management. When I read this, I thought, you know, that's a pretty good vision. And so one of the first things, you know, I had to ask myself, does this need to be changed? This still seems pretty relevant to me, but that would be one of the conversations that I'd have with faculty, staff, students, stakeholders. Is this still relevant? Because if it is, we don't need to change it. I don't need to change things for the sake of putting my stamp on it. If this is still relevant, and you guys worked really hard on this, and it fits really nicely into the CFAN's vision statement, and as well as into the University of Minnesota vision statement, which I checked and it does, you know, let's start there. And the way I'd go about doing that, I mentioned that I've conducted monthly graduate faculty meetings for about 7 years, and I use different methodologies for these faculty meetings. One of my favorite, and don't worry, we wouldn't have just endless meetings upon meetings upon meetings. The meetings need to have goals, timelines, and they need to fit into a strategy. But one of my favorite types of meetings are silent meetings. I love them. And you kind of chuckle, yeah. I love them because it gives the opportunity for people that might not want to speak up It gives them the agency to share their ideas. And so I get, when I've had these silent meetings, I get a more collective, a more thorough understanding of people's ideas, perspectives, and priorities. And I'm able to collect those, consolidate, and bring those back out for discussion. We do this at the Rubenstein School. We have a board up with some Post-it notes or index cards and ask people, what are you thinking? What are the strengths? What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? This is, again, a really broad swath of information and of ideas to hear where people are going. I love jigsaw meetings and discussions. I do a lot of that in my classroom. This is fun because it kind of forces you maybe to have a conversation with someone that you might not talk about a certain topic. And it kind of mixes things up, and it's fun. Dotmocracy, that's nothing new, but that really helps prioritize the strategies of what can be done. And then, of course, some of the meetings and discussions in which people are talking all over each other and that sort of thing. So that's kind of some of my approaches. So when I looked at the not being from here, not knowing all the background and what's going on in the department right now, I went to your strategic plan. And what I want to share with you are a couple of ideas. And these are just ideas. Maybe you've already done them. Maybe you've discussed them and don't want to do them. But these are just some things I pulled from the strategic plan. And one is, we might be able to elevate and strengthen existing partnerships through our teaching and learning mission. I've considerable amount of experience with service learning, with volunteering, with internships. And these are some real ways in which to strengthen that classroom experience, but also to give the students the hands-on tools and skills that then they can go on and continue working with our partners and actually get jobs in the position with our partners. Some of the other things that I just kind of, again, pulled, the Department of Forest Resources could host a CFANS-wide faculty slam. I don't know if you guys have been involved in slams before. They're high energy, they're high paced. It's basically faculty members, students, researchers stand up and give a 3-minute overview high of either something they're thinking about or something they're working on. You get about 50 people in a room doing this in quick succession. You get to really learn about other people and other people's research and have a space in which to go interact with them. Kind of similar, but a little bit more formal. We could have a CFANS seminar series, and we could co-host it. I just randomly picked another department, but it could be co-hosted, in which we bring our resources, our minds together, and bring people in, and that would really foster some of that collaboration and that interdisciplinary research and teaching. Mentorships, graduate, undergraduate mentorships. We just started this at University of Vermont. We just finished our first year where we have like a matchmaking in which there are undergraduates interested in graduate school but don't know what graduate students do. So we set them up. They meet several times throughout the academic year, and it might turn into a summer research internship project. And then also exploring ideas of shared positions. We have them with the Forest Service. They work, but could we do it with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources? Is this being done with other departments? That wasn't quite clear to me, and that might be something that is worth putting our heads together and seeing if that is something that we can do. The other thing that, as a leader, you can do, and that I kind of enjoy doing, it's fun, it's challenging, are having some bold new partnerships. And with these bold new partnerships, we have to ask the questions, do the partnerships make sense? Do we have goals that intersect? What would it look like if we're moving forward? Are we creating something larger than just these partnerships? And does it make sense? And again, looking from the strategic plan and from my web interview, I'm wondering if the timing is right. If we envision, if we think, if we dream about what a partnership might look like with Cloquet Forestry Center and Forest Resources and CFANS and the Fond du Lac college. There's a community college. They award an associate's degree in environmental science. What might that look like? Is it the timing right to have that conversation? Has that conversation been had? If it has and it hasn't worked, why not? And is that something, and again, this is not a top-down. This is something these are just some ideas that I pulled. Also, what about department? We're in a metropolitan area, and there are inner-city schools that aren't necessarily well-funded. Might we want to start having conversations with these schools so we can pick, so that those top students that might not have the opportunity, that might not know something exists that's called forest resources, does exist. And I pick North High School very intentionally because that's where my mother graduated from high school. She's one of the most brilliant people I've ever known, and she didn't go to college. That opportunity wasn't there for her. And is that something that we can explore? So whether or not you like any of these ideas or you think they're all crazy, as a department head, just some bullets here. I'm committed to a climate that values intellectual, cultural, and ethnic diversity, committed to development and success of all faculty, junior, mid-career like myself, and faculty that are interested in leaving their legacy, prioritize, commit, in strategic collaborative initiatives, enable, encourage, support, and celebrate bottom-up collaborative educational as well as research efforts, promote roles of interdependence as well as autonomy. Not everyone wants to be highly collaborative. That's okay. Not everyone needs to be or should be. Ensure that the department's vision, mission, and goals are driven by the budget. I know this is extremely challenging at UVM. We just adopted the incentive-based budgeting model that's similar to what's here at UVM, or at University of Minnesota for the past 15 years. This is challenging, but this would be something that I really want to work on. Look outward to maintain perspective and to maintain our relevancy. And then also to, this is kind of to the dean, but to represent the departmental needs and goals to the university administration. I don't mind, fighting for the department and envisioning and working with the dean to meet those goals, as I've shown through several examples. So at one of the community events with the graduate students where it was a breakfast and they put these note cards with questions that faculty go around and answer the questions. And one of the questions was, who inspires you? And I thought, faculty had, all sorts of different scientists. And the person who inspires me is Maya Angelou. She lives a beautiful, rich life. And one of the quotes that I really love is, a person is a product of their dreams. So make sure you dream great dreams and try to live your dream. And with that, I will take questions.
We have a few minutes for questions. It's okay. I'd like to open the floor for questions right now. There are also, if there's any questions online, go back. Even though you can't, this isn't really loud, it's going through the...
It's good to see you again.
Thank you. Good
My
to
name
see
is
you.
Paul Ellison, and
Yep.
I'm a retired faculty member. One of the things that is important about the University of Minnesota is that it is a great university.
It is.
It is known throughout the nation and throughout the world. One of the things that has made the University of Minnesota so great is its land grant mission, which was established in the mid-1800s. And the thing that made it so great, the land grant mission, was that it was focused on research, teaching, and service. Those are the fundamental things that we need to deal with. I guess I would just like to have you explore a little bit your views on those three missions of the university and this department and how you might blend those and maybe at some times emphasize one or the other.
Sure. So the land grant mission is kind of core to my education, to my philosophy, and actually I've worked at several land grant institutions throughout my past, and yes, it's teaching, research, service extension, and I think that while those are kind of three distinct pillars, I think that there's a lot of synergy and a lot of kind of gray area in between. And when I talk about the service or the extension and that level of learning with teaching, service learning teaching and internships and bringing those together. And also with research. Research, as I shared with you some of Sarah's research, that research was driven by the needs, in this case, Vermont, the needs of the state. And so that has to be part of the research mission. It absolutely has to. And through my seminar, I hope you were able to see that, a couple times I did have to pivot my research program and evolve it to meet the needs of the state, of the land grant mission that I was in. And in terms of faculty, of course, I would hope that the faculty would continue to do great research and teaching based on that land grant mission, as well as research that has frameworks that extend out to inform our broader nation and international efforts. Does that answer your question? Okay, thanks, Paul. And I might also add that I hope that the research, especially some of that land grant mission research, can also be translated into policy. See, you taught me. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk.
Thank you.
I was wondering, the Twin Cities are a metro area,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, and have you thought at all, and the Twin Cities are also experiencing a lot of challenges with things like emerald ash borer and
Yeah.
urban forest problems and things like that. So have you thought at all about how some of your skills, kind of developing these partnerships, might translate into an urban setting?
Oh, sure. So I think that the Cundy Company is no longer the Cundy Company. I worked, that was a private urban consulting company when I was an undergraduate. I worked with them for a couple of summers, and I worked for the city of Bloomington. And I think it would be fun to, I know that the Cundy Company was either purchased or something, but it would be fun to explore some of those companies that are looking for student internships that can, or classrooms that can work with cities that might not have the funding to do their street preparedness plans, sort of like what I did in the city of Burlington, South Burlington, and Winooski in the Burlington area. So I think that there are lots of opportunities. And I don't think it was mentioned, but my degree from the University of Minnesota is actually urban forestry. So yeah, I would very much look forward to bringing that back into my research portfolio and teaching portfolio. Yep.
Before I forget, I want to mention that there are evaluation forms in the back and for hard copy, but you can also go to the CFAN site and fill it in electronically as well. So I just want to make sure I mention that. We have time for a few more questions.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
I'm Mike Dockery. I work for the U.S. Forest Service and have adjunct appointment here.
Great.
I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about, I have two separate but related things. One, thoughts on engaging the tribes in the state.
Yeah.
And two, thoughts on just diversity and inclusion within the department, student, faculty,
Yeah.
and staff.
Yeah. So when I put that example up with the Fond du Lac, I'm very, very sincere about that. I think that some of my work in the Southwest and also some of the work that I've done in Israel with the Bedouin communities, I've seen some real disparities and but also some ways that when a person's willing to kind of step out of their comfort zone and move towards a partner or a potential partner and have conversations that are meaningful in both directions, that change can happen and those partnerships can happen. That would be something I'd be very, very excited about to do if I were here in the role of department head. And to also work with faculty that were also interested and to really facilitate some of those potential partnerships and collaborations. That's something that's quite important to me and also for some personal reasons, but yes, very much so. And then what was the second part of your question?
Diversity and inclusion, student, faculty, staff.
Yeah, so I found that, well, diversity of thought, definitely, I really think it's important to have kind of safe spaces where you can talk and share your ideas. One of the ways, and I know that the silent meetings sound kind of goofy, but they actually really work, because people that might have thoughts that differ greatly from someone who's typically dominates the conversation, that's a way for those points to be heard. It's a little bit more inclusive, and some of the jigsaw puzzling in meetings also does some of that. But when it comes to graduate students, again, it's the safe space. I have an open door policy as associate dean, and I have students come and talk to me about their advisors, about committee, about issues that they are facing. I was part of a team that wrote several multicultural grants from USDA that were awarded to the school to recruit underrepresented groups, both in the undergraduate and graduate program. Those were successful. I think that they could be more successful now that we've had some of those and we've addressed those. Like, we should have a network, so the students that receive these scholarships actually can keep in touch with each other and form a network. We didn't do that, so I think that there are some things like that I could bring with me and say, okay, let's do this, but we can add some of these other components that would very much strengthen it. Is that okay?
Are there?
And I think there's some in the hall. No? Okay.
Well, first I want to make sure there's some online. Any questions online? Any out in the hallway? Questions? Okay. It is time, I think.
Yeah.
So let's thank Dr. Wellen for.
Thank you.
Let's see. So again, fill out the evaluation forms. I think you have a lunch meeting.
Okay.
Is Lori around? I don't have the schedule, but I think it could be in this room.
Okay.
It's either in this room or downstairs. And there will be opportunity for the department to visit
Great.
with you throughout at designated times.
Great, yeah. And if you see me in the hallway and have a question, just ask.
Yes.
I'd like to hear your thoughts. All right.